Hey team, welcome back to the show. Today we are going to be talking through your 2026 Physique roadmap. So last episode, Andrea, Natalie, and myself talked about our own 2026 Physique goals and roadmaps. So in today's episode, I want to kind of walk you through what this could look like for you based on a common client avatar that we work with. So basically what each of your phases could look like in terms of training, nutrition to get to your goal physique. Now, as a warning, it probably won't be the roadmap you're expecting, or it might be if you listen to the podcast consistently. Most people probably want to start with fat loss in January, but that might actually be hurting your results. So really our focus here is on teaching you how to apply our Phasic approach to physique development in your own transformation timeline and walking you through an actual year-long plan, phase by phase. Again, alongside some real life client case studies based on a very common avatar that we work with. And in this case, I thought of like when I was writing this, I've shared a lot about my client Britt's journey over the last year plus now. Very common real life client of ours where her goal basically when she started was to look like she lifts, which for her entailed both getting leaner and building a good amount of muscle. She was already training consistently 3 to 4 days a week, and she had built some muscle, but didn't have a ton when she started. She was mindful of her food. Probably this person even tracks their macros, but not that lean. I would say in this case, typically around like 25% body fat. So again, quite similar to where my client Britt was when she started, and in a similar place to where a lot of clients are starting, and kind of aligns with a very common goal set of new clients. So that's really what we'll be basing this on. Now, before we get into the episode today, I am joined by Michelle, our client success manager. If you have signed up to work with our team at any point in the last like 6-ish months or so, you've probably talked to Michelle. Michelle has been a client of mine for over a year. She has been taking most of our client intro calls for quite a while now as well. So I'm excited to have you here, Michelle. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So do you want to just tell the listeners just a little bit about yourself before we get into it? Just kind of who you are, what you're up to?
Yep. So I, like Jeremiah said, have been working with Jeremiah as a client since last January. And
Best year of your life so far, right?
Absolutely. It's really been quite a transformation from an educational standpoint. I think, like you said, many people come into this. I sound very much like your client Britt in the beginning, thinking that I worked out a lot, not really looking like I worked out a lot, and just kind of learning what the value of strength training coupled with your nutrition coach doing both things for you, how those two things work together. And then I myself am not even through all of the phases, and just seeing how those kind of pile on each other and the value of sitting in each phase, the importance of that, and having the patience for that.
I've shared you on my page quite a bit as well. Michelle, for those who don't know, is like the most jacked, ripped 50-year-old you know. Do you think for you, was it like the training the biggest piece? What do you think was the biggest missing piece for you? That is something we put a big focus on with your shift from CrossFit, and that's like right away I knew that was going to be a big lever for us. But what do you think?
I think, especially now taking those calls for the past 6 months, a lot of people come in, the type of population who is like probably Britt and I, we come in thinking that we know how to lift. From a CrossFit background, I figured I would know the movements really well and just kind of integrate in. However, I was one of those clients that came to you and said, I'm just going to do nutrition only. I already know how to train. And that shifted about 3 weeks in. I was dead set on just doing nutrition. And then once we bundled the two together, basically I was scared of the primer phase. We'll talk about that later. And wanting to hop right into fat loss and not truly understanding how to sit in that primer phase, and then realizing my body and my weight and everything did change in my primer phase. It went more like what I would have interpreted as a fat loss phase. So, it's kind of just sharing with people that you don't want to be scared that you're not going to see results right away because we're not putting you in that stereotypical fat loss phase. That the beginning primer phase is really, cleaning the body up and getting it ready, and things do change during that period.
Sure. And we can definitely dig into that a little bit more as we kind of talk about what that would look like for this client avatar. But let's go ahead and get into it. First, just a bit of a foundation when it comes to understanding the Phasic approach for this timeline we'll be talking through for your next year. So basically with the Phasic approach, we're strategically using different nutritional and training phases that kind of build on each other. So think of it like this. We have 3 levers we can pull to change your body composition. We have fat loss, which is primarily going to be stimulated by what you're doing with your nutrition and your cardio and movement. Most people really only focus on this, but we also have the muscle growth lever, which, like we talked about in your case, hey, that might have been just as impactful for those physique changes you've seen as a fat loss. It is going to primarily be stimulated by your training, which getting that correct is so important, again, as we mentioned. And then also your nutrition is supportive of your training in that it really fuels the quality of your training. The better our training quality is, the better we can drive a muscle building stimulus to a degree. Nutrition is going to be very important for our recovery and ability to build new tissue as well. But it's kind of like training is the signal and food is what supports that signal to a degree. And then we also have improved health, which is another variable in the primer phase that a lot of people are overlooking, which helps amplify both fat loss and muscle growth. So like in your case, we really focused on in that first phase, hey, we want to improve your digestion, right? I think there's some thyroid downregulation. There were some other things hormonally we looked at in your blood work and looked to like, hey, can we improve this? Can we improve this? We have better digestion, better sleep, stress management, better movement, better hydration, better micronutrient intake, right? Especially when we're looking at things like your micronutrient intake and your digestion, which are going to be so important for supporting our thyroid function, right? Which is going to make your fat loss so much easier. Your energy is going to be higher. Even like for building muscle, like your T3 levels are so important for so many processes in your body, but it is quite important for building muscle, not just fat loss. But that's going to increase our baseline energy expenditure, right? If we're sleeping better, we have better stress management, we're getting, again, these micros we need, especially if we're digging into blood work like we did in your case. And there are things with like sex hormones that we can improve. Then we have a hormonal environment that is much more conducive to you being able to build muscle. Will also aid in the fat loss side of things as well, right? So basically, these different levers and pulling them at the right time is a key part of this concept of the phasic approach. So it's kind of think of it as this idea of potentiation, right? By pulling the right lever at the right time, each phase sets up the next phase to be more effective. And again, most people only ever pull the fat loss lever. They diet, they do more cardio, they diet harder, they do even more cardio and don't get anywhere. So again, today we're trying to teach you how to use all three strategically to see your best year of progress ever. So again, revisiting client avatar. Think of this as someone whose goal is really to look like they lift. They probably need to get both leaner and build more muscle to do so. You are probably already training consistently 3 to 4 days a week. And you've built some muscle, but not as much as you expect for how long you've been in the gym. And you are aware of your nutrition. You eat well or even might track your macros a lot of the time. But again, we're not necessarily that lean. I guess before we continue, feel free to like jump in whenever, any questions, whenever you want to stop me. Good on that? Anything to throw in?
Yeah, I think I should just pop in and say that during my primer phase was actually when I lost about 8% of my body weight. And then going into my fat loss phase, I've lost maybe just another 2%. I would say I lost 10% total. So only 2% came from fat loss, but the body composition change was, drastically different than.
Yeah, in your case, we really were able to clean up your nutrition a lot in that primer phase initially, and just improving the things like digestion. Like we did see a nice downward trend, and then your training was really starting to click as well in the fat loss phase, which we didn't have that far to go either. Like once it was a pretty short fat loss phase that you did. I think we spent a good amount more time in our primer phase than our fat loss phase, if I recall correctly. So we didn't really have that far to go, but the actual visual changes we saw, because you've also built a good amount of muscle, did definitely outpace even the scale weight loss that we saw.
Yeah, my primer phase may have been a little bit shorter, not to, scare people off that you might sit here for months, you may, but, I turned 50, had birthday parties, traveled to Mexico. I did a lot of things during my primer phase that needed to be worked in.
For sure, for sure. All right, so getting into then some key insights for this avatar we're discussing. The biggest things I see with this client are typically they usually need to build a good amount of muscle, of course, to reach their goal physique, and oftentimes need significantly more muscle to get to that physique than they might realize. I would say typically this person overestimates how much fat they need to lose and underestimates the muscle growth needed, which is actually probably pretty similar to your case. A pretty common outcome in this instance is going to be this client needs to lose about 10% of their body weight total to get to their goal physique. That will generally have health bottlenecks sabotaging progress to a degree that we need to address. Not always the case. If not, that's great, right? Like we're not going to try to create problems that aren't there, but there will oftentimes be things like, hey, we have constipation or digestive issues. And if we look deeper into this, the root cause, which is often lifestyle based, could be like, hey, maybe we have low stomach acid, right? And like us better supporting that within what we can actually like, and again, it's not like we're actually gonna do, there are like at home tests we can do and like, hey, based on what we consistently see, we can better support this with these different things. Like this is an instance where like apple cider vinegar can actually be useful, for example. And if we can get you digesting your foods better, that will better support our ability to break down, absorb, utilize the different micronutrients that will then support things like our thyroid. And then often even just simple things like your poor hydration, poor micronutrient intake. Again, really those variables, the minerals we need to support these health processes, just better supporting that can get our body in a much more responsive place. But again, there's oftentimes a few bottlenecks there that we need to address. And then we just need to build as a whole a better foundation and kind of structure for them to be successful. So we're often missing things like just day to day, there's not a lot of structure in terms of things like meal timing. We're doing a poor job with peri-workout fueling, with nutrition. So just creating a lot more structure around that. This client is also typically under eating carbs specifically. Kind of like we chatted about in your case, we oftentimes need to learn how to train effectively for hypertrophy. Both execution and effort, basically proximity to failure, will need to be improved quite a bit. So again, and like in your case, like you knew how to train, but we didn't really know how to train well for hypertrophy, right? You came from a CrossFit background, coach yourself, but the way we'd execute like for CrossFit versus when the goal is to build muscle is quite different. I remember like your split squats telling you the first couple of weeks, like, dude, we still have so many more reps in the tank here, right? And it can be kind of uncomfortable at first, but truly for almost everyone, just once we get the execution down, just understanding like what training close to failure truly looks like is such a new thing, but it does make such a big difference. So because there's so much foundation to build, before we just like hop into fat loss, it's kind of like we don't know how to drive and we're just putting you on the interstate right away, right? Whereas here we want to really focus on building the foundation for success first. And then another important variable for this client that I think is often overlooked, we talk about building and the importance of building muscle a lot here, but this person is typically at a high enough body fat that they really won't see the shape they want until they get leaner. So for this person, I think it aligns pretty well with the natural learning curve. So basically, it takes time to learn how to train well. So for this person, I typically find it makes sense to focus on, after this primer phase, getting leaner first, and then go all in on building once training is really clicking. And again, this aligns well with the learning curve, as throughout these first couple phases, as we are improving body composition, getting leaner, they're picking up the skills and really understanding training. And then right when the point where we're quite lean and we can actually see more of the gains that we are building as we're leaner, it's easier to see all the progress we're making. And we're also in like a better position health-wise, like better nutrient partitioning, insulin sensitivity to build muscle. Then actually building becomes a lot more productive. Again, like training is really clicking. We understand how to do that, so we can do more with more fuel rather than just getting body fat. So I think it makes the most sense to kind of follow this progression of, for this person, teach them how to train as we get leaner, and then really focus on building versus the other way around. We can build as we're getting leaner, but again, most people just won't be sufficient enough at training yet for that to really make sense on just like doing a building phase first, unless we're quite lean already. Any thoughts, questions there before we continue?
I think just trusting the sequencing of everything, and then the huge thing is training to the correct RIR and knowing what failure is where the turning point, in building muscle happened for me. Failure is very different than most people think.
There's for sure levels to it too. Like with my coach now, that's a conversation we've had a lot, right? Where he's still like, yeah, you still have more in the tank. That's weird to hear. But it is truly like even like a task failure versus muscular failure. And like, hey, you're expending all this effort here with like, you're bobbing your head so much on your leg press and you're losing your brace, right? And that's actually that's like causing you to fail a few reps sooner than you would otherwise. There's a progression where there's like a constantly new level we can learn, but yeah, it's a huge part of it. Okay, so let's get into phase one here, which is going to be this primer phase that we have talked about a lot. Now, hypothetically, this could be 4 to 6 weeks. If we are in a good place, not much to address, it could be a little bit shorter. If there's a lot to address, it could be a lot longer. I think yours was like 12 weeks. Is that correct? Okay. But there were a few more things that we need to address here. So in this phase, again, hypothetically 4 to 6 weeks, we're going to focus on building the foundation for future phases. So we want you consistently nailing your food targets, fueling well around training, getting your body in a healthy, responsive place for fat loss. We want to optimize energy, digestion, sleep. We want your biofeedback in a good place. And again, really teach you how to train hard and execute well. Now, common starting reality for this person is that typically this individual isn't eating all that much in terms of calories. So we also, if we were to hop right into a fat loss phase, we just wouldn't have that much to pull from. And this is an important obstacle that we need to address. Now, some of this comes from they might just not be tracking all that accurately, right? A lot of people, even those who are tracking their food consistently, are like, it's actually when you hop into their food logs, it's like, okay, well, we've tracked like 3 or 4 days per week for the last month. But this is like, that's like 50% of the time, right? And we're skipping the weekends, we're skipping the days when the calories are the highest. We're actually not accounting for a large amount of your calories. So sometimes it is just a matter of, hey, we're not tracking accurately and we're actually eating more than we think. Other things like we can improve your food choices to increase satiety, so it feels like you're eating more. We can also leverage up a higher step count so that we're expending more and thus can eat more without gaining. But again, typically as a result of, this person's movement isn't all that high as a result of that. And again, us addressing them, some of the things like your micronutrient needs, better supporting internal health, and just better tracking. What we will be able to do throughout this phase in the first couple of phases is actually work their food up a considerable amount so that when we do enter fat loss, we're in a place where we can pull calories more and without it hurting nearly as much. The strategy in this phase is typically an eat more, move more approach for me. Basically, what I want to do is I want to drive up both food and movement simultaneously. And this will probably continue in the next phase. So basically what we're doing here is we're increasing movement, which I'm typically going to start with primarily focusing on more steps. So a lot of times it's like this person is getting 4,000 to 6,000 steps per day. Hey, can we titrate that up to like 8K and then maybe 10K? And then what's realistic for you? Can we potentially go up to like 12K is like 10K or ceiling? Like, let's find what's feasible and realistic for you. But even that, like over the course of a week, a month, that's a lot more calories burned. And thus we can ramp up food alongside that. So we're improving movement. We're improving health and responsiveness. So things like the food quality, digestion, etc. We're increasing food alongside this, and we're improving the actual training stimulus we're getting, right? We're teaching you how to train. So we are focusing on better execution, better intention, and even just a better training program, meaning you are going to start building muscle. So we will see some visual shifts in this phase. And then from there, like once we have those steps in a decent place, again, like I typically like to get someone up to at least like 8 to 10K, if at all feasible. Depending on the person, I might implement like 3, 10 to 15, maybe 10 to 20 minute cardio sessions per week. If there's steps, we've had a long ways to go in terms of steps, and I've ramped that up quite a lot already. I don't like to like push this lever too much because I like to be able to kind of conserve that for the next phase. But I also do like to start to get people in the habit of, hey, we're probably gonna have cardio in the next phase. So let's kind of bake this into your routine now so that it's second nature and we can really hit the ground running in the next phase. In terms of food, I typically like to start somewhere around what I estimate to be this person's, like about the mid-range of what I estimate to be their maintenance. Typically going to be like the same intake daily for this person rather than a calorie cycling approach. Again, just want it to be simple, easy to execute. And based on how they respond, typically what we'll see is like I will put someone at what I estimate to be the mid-range of their maintenance. Food quality is improved, tracking accuracy is improved. Generally, I like this person to just follow a meal plan, so there's like very little room for error, or at least most of the time follow a meal plan. Almost always is what we'll see is, and like, hey, I might ramp your steps up initially like 2K per day. Almost always what we'll see is, oh, hey, I'm actually getting leaner. We saw like a bit of a weight drop. We saw some nice measurement drops. And generally the first like 4 to 6 weeks here, we'll see like every week, every other week, wow, we're actually getting leaner. We're getting leaner. Okay, let's keep ramping up food. If we can get leaner in this phase, that's great. But our goal is first and foremost to get us in a position to be successful in the next couple phases. Alongside that, health optimization, of course, is an important part of this. So as we discussed, just addressing the common bottlenecks like constipation, digestive issues, poor sleep. We've already talked about that quite a lot, so I don't think we need to address that any further. In terms of training, already touched on this quite a lot as well, but again, really teaching you how to train for hypertrophy. I would probably, like most people, my favorite approach here is going to be just a 4-day-a-week upper-lower split. We don't need to get too specialized yet. This person typically just needs to learn how to train, master the basic movement patterns, and just build muscle across the board. But again, in this phase, we should start to see visual shifts. You're getting leaner, you're building muscle, you feel much better, your energy is better, all our biofeedback is better, and training starts to feel very productive. Now, typically, I'm ready to transition to the next phase when this person has shown me they can be extremely consistent hitting their food intake targets. We have a lot of structure and daily routine in terms of meal timing, hydration, sleep. Major biofeedback issues are resolved or improving, right? So I don't see anything as a major bottleneck for our ability to build muscle or lose fat in the next couple phases. Any questions there before we continue?
Yeah, I think it would be nice for people to hear back, kind of circling back to the steps and increasing output. What do you tell your clients when they come to you and they're like, I really just I want to run, I want to do CrossFit with this. Isn't that increasing my output as well?
Yeah, so I mean, it's gonna be to a degree. I'm not opposed to someone working in like running or even CrossFit, right? Like it depends on the client. It depends on what their goals are. If you were to come to us because you were inspired by a certain transformation, and it was someone who had been like a lot of the transformations that bring people in are someone who's like, hey, they've gone all in on their process, right? They've really focused on just training 4 to 5 days a week with us to really focus on maximizing their ability to build muscle specifically. Basically, to get the results, if you want results like them, we also need to be willing to follow a process like them. We can't pick and choose. Again, there's nothing wrong with like CrossFit, for example, but if we're trying to squeeze in like 3 to 4 CrossFit sessions per week and get a quality hypertrophy stimulus across like 4 training sessions, it does become just a lot for us to recover from, where the actual quality of our training sessions will deteriorate or our ability to recover from them will deteriorate. But more so it's like the quality, because again, we're just trying to cram so much in that our actual ability to recover and push hard in those sessions, get the most out of our hypertrophy sessions can take a hit, or just like you're just feeling so beat up all the time, we just don't get much out of it. So it can start to suffer there. Running, again, it's gonna be very like you can work in a decent. I don't really have a problem with running to a degree, unless you're like training for a marathon and we want to get as jacked as we can at the same time and we want to get lean. It just depends on how it's very dependent on your goals and like where it falls, because we kind of have, think of it like a triangle, right? On one end, we have one point we have building as much muscle as possible. The other point we have getting as lean as possible. And then at the tip of the triangle, we have like like your running performance, right? And all of those are kind of like at different points in the spectrum where we can't optimize for all of them at once. So the further we want to go in any one direction, the more we have to be willing to give in terms of the other. So it's very much going to be dependent on your goals. But if it's like, I want the best results possible out of this, I would say like, hey, I mean, our running is, there's nothing wrong with running, but unless we're like talented at it, we actually like move well when we run. It's not something that just leaves you feeling beat up. Probably, and it will be like a larger recovery debt for us. We're probably going to want to bias like less taxing forms of cardio, like more. And again, like we could run and stay in zone 2, but if you find like it beats up your joints, for example, hey, might not be the best option for us if it's going to hurt our lower body training. Or again, if we're like running so many miles, it's really hindering our ability to recover or push as hard in our lower body sessions, then it can start to be counterproductive. So it just largely depends on the goal there. That makes sense?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. So phase 2 would be a body recomposition phase, which I would say is probably going to last about 8 to 12 weeks. Now, body recomposition is simultaneous fat loss and muscle growth, basically what everyone wants. Now, the ideal scenario for this to happen is when body fat is moderate. We're in a place where someone is new to experiencing a quality training stimulus. So quite similar to what we talked about in terms of you, like, hey, you've been training for a long time, but you were new to hypertrophy training specifically. The newer we are to that signal, the more responsive to it we will be. And of course, your recovery and your consistency need to be in a good place. Now, recomposition works very well as this next phase because by this point, training is starting to click. Typically, the person isn't quote unquote great at training yet, but good enough that we're definitely starting to productively build some new tissue. And it's also just a matter of time, right? Like it takes several weeks for us to get good enough at a movement, get coordinated enough at a movement to actually meaningful or to actually generate hypertrophy. Before that, it's basically just skill adaptations rather than us building new muscle tissue. So we're basically just at the point now where we've gotten good enough at the thing that we're building muscle. We have built a lot of structure around their day-to-day habits. They are consistent with food timing, hitting macros, peri-workout fueling, etc. And we've mostly addressed the health bottlenecks, biofeedback bottlenecks that could stop us from being responsive to fat loss or muscle growth. So because of this, we're in a place where we can really see some impressive body composition changes without really needing to push food too low or for them to really feel like they're dieting. So this is a really cool place to be. This is like one of my favorite phases when someone like graduates from that first primer phase and is in a body recomposition phase. So here, calories aren't often super high yet. So I would rather we keep food high for longer. So typically what I prefer to do is drive change using more cardio and the training. So basically using more cardio to increase calorie output to continue to get us a bit leaner, and then using the improved training stimulus to build muscle, which will change the shape of your physique, improve the ratio of fat mass to lean mass, which also literally decreases our body fat. And then again, ideally, we'll actually be able to continue to increase food throughout this phase so that when we get into a dedicated fat loss phase, we have a high calorie intake to pull from if needed to drive further fat loss. So in terms of cardio, what I'm typically going to like to do here is probably start this person at something like 30-ish to 40-ish minute sessions, zone 2 cardio. If needed, I mean, we can push this all the way up to like, and depending on the person, their levels, like how much they can handle, we can push this all the way up to like 4 or 5 30 to 40 minute zone 2 cardio sessions. If possible, which this isn't realistic for everyone, but if possible, I would also love for this to be something that's fasted cardio paired with yohimbine. So we talked about yohimbine quite a lot on the show. Basically, yohimbine, a supplement that helps us. If we use it in a fasted state, what it does is basically helps us get fatty acids out of otherwise stubborn body fat cells. Women specifically tend to have like a higher density of stubborn body fat cells in areas like hips, thigh. It's been really cool because it helps us liberate fatty acids from the cell. And then basically, so when we look at fat loss and like what we need to create fat loss, basically we need catecholamines to act on the cell to get fatty acid out of the cell. And then that fatty acid is in the bloodstream, and then we need a reason to actually burn it for fuel. Otherwise, it'll just go back into the fat cell. So when we pair, again, like stimulants help increase catecholamines, which will help bring fatty acids out of the cell again. Yohimbine is a stimulant, but also kind of unlocks these cells to get the fatty acids out of the cells. And then when we pair it with fasted cardio, that is our reason to burn this as fuel. So basically, it can help us burn more body fat specifically from stubborn areas if we do like this fasted cardio and being combo, but it's not make or break if we can't do it fasted. Alongside this, I do really like a high day, low day calorie cycling tool. So this is when I would oftentimes transition someone from just eating the same intake daily to go in like a high day, low day. I find this really effective in body recomposition phases. So basically we're using the higher days to eat plenty of carbs, keep the client well fueled, keep biofeedback in a good place, keep training performance great, etc. And then we'll have 2 to 3 lower calorie days per week where we're probably in a deficit and we're driving fat loss, right? Whereas those higher days are probably at the maintenance, upper end of maintenance. These 2 to 3 days a week, we're actually in a decent sized deficit and starting to push fat loss along here. Now, we can kind of make all this work very synergistically to also improve the person's metabolic flexibility. So the zone 2 cardio, and these high low days. So basically your metabolic flexibility is your body's ability to use both carbs and fat for fuel. The better our metabolic flexibility is, the better our health will be, but also like typically the easier I find the easier it is for people to get leaner. Now, most people are not all that good at using, unless they're quite lean, aren't all that good at using fat for fuel at fat oxidation. So what I like to do a lot of times on these lower days is actually bias a much lower carb, slightly higher fat, but as a whole, I mean, your calories are still going to be lower, a lower carb, higher fat intake. Now, from a satiety perspective, like let's say Michelle, I was going to push you at like, let's say you're at like 140 protein, 120 carb, and like, I don't know, 45 fat. What I find is, or like, let's say like 125 carb, 45 fat. What I find is from satiety perspective, you would actually probably be a lot more full throughout the day. You would find that more manageable if we biased, let's say like 60 fat and 100 carb, 90 carb. Sometimes even pushing it a little bit lower than that, pushing the fat higher, like 65, 70 fat and like 80, 70, 80 carb, which can sound quite low. Now, this isn't forever, but in this phase, again, you will like, that will be a little bit more satiating. I typically also like to, in that case, what I find is if we like try to spread it out to like, we have 4 15-gram boluses of carbs, just like stimulates a little bit of hunger. Whereas if we keep the first couple meals like mostly fat and protein, then add in carbs later in the day, that typically is going to work the best. But that's going to be more satiating, but also those lower carb, higher fat days are going to force our body to use more fat for fuel. So that in itself, again, we're getting our body better at the skill of using fat for fuel. Zone 2 cardio also improves mitochondrial density and increases the amount of mitochondria we have. That is a very important part. Mitochondrial health and density is a very important part of our ability to actually oxidize fat, use fat as fuel. So this also really, like the zone 2 cardio, helps improve metabolic flexibility alongside that. Then specifically, again, if we're doing fasted cardio specifically, we are going to be using more fat as fuel. Whereas if we're doing our cardio in a fed state, we're going to have more carbs in our bloodstream. We're more likely to do that. It is really like in the last year, this is something I've put a lot more focus on and used a lot more. And it is pretty cool to see how much of a positive impact someone is like focusing on improving someone's metabolic flexibility has on their ability to lose fat. I would say the most drastic examples of this I've seen actually are at like, I've had a decent amount of men at a much higher body fat this year, like quite high body fat. Like I think my client Greg, where I think he were down from like 290 to 240 so far. Dieted, or like Matt Moore is someone who I've talked about a lot with this approach as well, or like my guy Will, where we dieted on quite low carbs for a period of at least like 6 to 8 weeks. Quite low carbs, prioritize a lot of zone 2 cardio. Before that, it was like, man, we're at like quite a low calorie intake and but a balanced diet, and this person just does not lose very well at all, right? And then from there, like once we go through this phase where we're focusing on improving metabolic flexibility, lots of zone 2 specifically is quite important here. Then once we get done with it, what we'll find is it's pretty cool how much more food that person can lose on, and like they do so much better with more carbohydrates in the diet as well. I'm kind of just rambling, so again, feel free to jump in whenever. In terms of nutrition, go ahead.
The metabolic flexibility just being so underrated and then kind of watching it unfold as an individual is remarkable.
Yeah, it is cool to see. And again, it'll vary from person to person. Like if you're already quite lean, it's probably not a huge issue for you. But again, like the higher someone's body fat is, especially, just the more effective I found it to be. If you're someone who has like a large health bottleneck, like again, we have like thyroid issues, thyroid dysfunction, hormonal dysfunction, probably don't want to do extremely low carbs. So again, it's case by case. But if someone is like otherwise in a healthy place, that approach does work quite well. Now, in terms of our nutrition progression here, which again, we wouldn't be using like that extreme of an approach here. But again, in your case, I might be like those low days, we might be pulling you down to like, again, like the hypothetical, like 60, 70 fat, somewhere 70 to 90 carb, like let's say like one about body weight plus 10 to 20 grams in protein. Wouldn't be a like bad starting point. In terms of nutrition progression, generally what we're going to be doing, again, like the goal here is ideally adding food throughout this phase. So typically what I'm going to do is keep those low days relatively stable and not really touch them. Those continue to drive fat loss. But what I'm going to be able to do is similar to what we did in the last phase, typically add carbs to those high days throughout this phase, especially when we're increasing cardio. A lot of times what we'll see is, hey, this person is maintaining extremely well on this intake. I'm going to add, if we're seeing someone losing on this intake, a lot of times I won't even need to add cardio. Hey, I might just add like somewhere between 10 and 25 grams of carbs to their high days. More fuel around the time when you need it the most. Insulin sensitivity will be the best. We're more likely to shuttle those carbs towards muscle cells versus fat cells. But then alongside that, even if it's just like, hey, I just want to continue to drive their intake up without me seeing them losing, then a lot of times what we'll do is like, hey, maybe we're going to add 10 minutes to each of these cardio sessions, and then we're going to add 25 grams of carbs to each of your high days, for example. Training really doesn't need to change a lot here. Focus is still on just learning the skill, progressive overload over time. Now, typically what we'll see in this phase is quicker visual changes in body composition. This is where the things really start to pick up there, but you shouldn't really feel like you're dieting yet. The scale probably won't move dramatically because we're, again, really starting to build more muscle, but measurements and visuals will definitely rapidly outpace the change that we're seeing on the scale. And then by the end of the phase, we will be noticeably leaner and a bit more muscular. Now, typically, we're ready to move on to the next phase when the rate of body recomposition starts to slow, which is going to be normal here. Around 12 to 18 weeks into doing all this quite well, I mean, we could see recomp indefinitely, but we'll kind of start to hit a point where it's like, okay, we're pretty lean now. We're also getting quite good at training. We have like 3 days a week where food is fairly low. It might make more sense for us to ultimately get to the place we want to be quicker, for us to now kind of go all in on fat loss. Just get the fat loss phase done with so we can keep you eating more food 7 days a week and really push you in an even better place to build muscle rather than kind of like trying to have our cake and eat it too. But we want to make sure food is at a good level to pull from. And this person will typically by this point have still about 5 to 7% of their total body weight to lose to hit their goal. Which brings us into phase 3, the fat loss phase, which here again is typically only going to be about 8 to 12 weeks. So we'll have seen a lot of decent visual changes by this point. But again, we'll have typically started to see the rate of body recomposition slow. Now, as I mentioned, this client typically needs to lose about 10% of their initial body weight to get close to the goal physique. Again, we typically have realistically like 5 to 7% of body weight total to go here. It's pretty feasible. Now, if we're in a healthy, responsive place like that, doing that in 8 to 12 weeks, for most people just isn't a huge deal, thanks to the way we approach things before. where again, we're in a healthy, responsive place. But also the cool part about this is we have your calories in a much higher place thanks to the move more, eat more approach we've been taking over the last few phases. So in this phase, we can just keep movement where it is. And just like, man, by this point, like we might have very easily like 500 calories to pull from to get you back to what you thought was your previous maintenance intake. And then that can drive fat loss very, very quickly without feeling like food is extremely low. So the approach I like here is typically to start more aggressively. I, in general, prefer to start diets more aggressively if I have a good feeling about how, or a good gauge on how someone will respond. So when biofeedback is good and body fat is higher, we can push harder without as many detriments. So the first few weeks of this phase, I'm okay with, let's say like the first 2 to 4 weeks, I'm okay with this person losing like 1 to 1.5% of their body weight per week. Again, we just want to make your body, typical fat loss will be easiest at the start. It'll have the least negative impact on our training performance at the start for us to push harder. So why not get as much done as we can early on? Now, in this case, we talked previously about this high-low diet structure. I might start like the first week or two, I might just go, hey, we're going to keep that same structure, but we're going to hit all low days this week. Or maybe we're going to hit 3 low days, 1 high day, and then repeat. Again, we're going to push hard while the sledding is relatively easy. And then over the next few weeks, as hunger increases, biofeedback starts to suffer, what we do is add in more and more of those high days. By the latter part of this phase, I typically am only going to want to see this person losing like 0.5 to 1% of their body weight per week. And here again, like it's not just weight that we're focusing on. It is also how our measurements changing, how is progress pictures changing, etc. But again, once we get quite deep into this, like starting off with, hey, maybe it's all low days or it's 3 low, 1 high. And realistically, through this phase, we could probably keep like a 3 low, 1 high, or maybe like 2 low, 2 high, repeat. Basically, like 3 to 5 low days, 4 to 5 low days a week, 2 to 3 high days a week. Realistically, we're not lean enough or training hard enough yet that we necessarily need more than that. Some, like if this was you going through this, Michelle, you have more muscle than most, and you are quite lean already. So you are someone who actually we might realistically start, and you know how to train really well now, right? Because you, again, like you already knew what effort looked like. It was basically us just teaching you a different way of moving. You are someone who might actually need more of like a training day, rest day approach towards the latter half of this phase where we actually have higher food on our training days, lower food on our rest days, to better support your ability to train hard and recover still, because we don't want that suffering as we get deeper into this phase. Now, to make that work, like your carbs wouldn't be able to stay as high as the previous phase, right? We might have to bring down, like we still need you to be in a net deficit, right? So that your carbs might still be lower than they were in the previous phase. We have a higher intake, a lower intake. Those low days, we're still pushing fat loss more. The training days, we are keeping food higher to better support training. Now, in this phase, this is where we see the quickest visual changes because fat loss happens very quickly. Fat loss happens much quicker than muscle growth. This is quite rewarding because again, you see the changes like week to week. That's why fat loss is always like typically the most, I don't know if I would say the most fun, but the most exciting, most instantly gratifying for most people. You will look noticeably leaner consistently, and more shape with the muscle we've been building will come through as body fat comes off. I also find though, for a lot of people aren't that good at the skill of dieting yet. Sometimes it's just a mental component, but by around the 8 to 12 week mark of this phase, oftentimes I'll find people hit a bit of a wall. They will look a lot leaner and have a lot more shape, but we'll hit a point where either biofeedback is really starting to suffer. They're just like, I'm just like sick of dieting, struggling with adherence more. Or my gauge is, hey, us getting you a whole lot leaner from here just really won't do a whole lot more to actually change the shape of your physique, which I would say is pretty similar to like where you were. Like we could have gotten you like more shredded, but your physique wouldn't actually like have them take on a much different shape by us getting leaner. So by this point, when we were like transitioning out of fat loss, so at this point, it makes sense for us to now focus on actually building that shape you want, transitioning to the building phase, which brings us to our lean building phase, which is going to be at least 25 to 30 weeks realistically. This timeline is always longer than people want to hear. And I mean, really, dude, to build a lot of muscle, if your goal physique is a lot more muscle than you have currently, to be realistic for a lot of people, we're looking at like, hey, we need a year, 2 years of you really, really training well. That might be moving through multiple phases, but well over a year focused on just building, fueling yourself well. That's again, like people don't I think like coaches don't like to talk about those timelines and how long it can take because it seems like bad marketing, but I think it's worse marketing to just not be realistic with it. So again, the client needs more muscle to have the shape they want long term. And the prior phases have really perfectly set us up for this. They're much leaner now. So we have great insulin sensitivity and nutrient partitioning. A lot of the food that we're taking in, more of the food we're taking in will be shuttled to muscle versus fat. They actually know how to train effectively, so we can do more with more food, and their body needs more fuel now to build, so it aligns very well with this phase. So transitioning into it, typically, we're going to pull cardio down significantly. And over a few weeks, bring food back up to maintenance. We've talked about like what the reverse diet process looks like a lot in previous podcasts. I won't cover that too much here. And also, I'm going to conduct a needs analysis with the client. What muscle groups need the most work, right? So like for you, you're like, I really want jacked arms and I hate lower body training. We can probably still do some lower body, but those weren't your exact words. Arms, delts were a big priority for us initially, and now like arms and upper back, correct? But we're gonna do a needs analysis, both like what do I think will get you closer to the goal physique that you've given me, and then from your perspective as well, what do we want to prioritize? And then map out, okay, based on this, hey, what do I think the next 6 to 8 months will look like? Or another example, like in Britt's example, for her, it was, hey, I really want to bring up my lower body. And in her case, what we did is she was someone like by this point she trained really well. She built a lot of muscle. Okay, we're going to go all in on lower body specialization. And actually, we shifted to a similar to how you have microcycles rather than weeks. So you have 4 training days, but it might take you 8 to 9 days to actually complete that microcycle rather than like, hey, we train 4 days every 7 weeks, or we do 4 training days every 7 days, for example. So similar to her, we did 4 training days over a 9-day microcycle. Again, rather than a traditional week, and basically split it up to be posterior, so glute, hamstring priority, quad priority. We still, of course, trained her upper body, but big, actually, I think it was glutes, quads one day, and then hamstrings and upper body the other. But even like on her hamstring days, like we might be doing an RDL as well, right? So lower body does take a lot to recover from, and our training quality is very important. If we're training like lower body 4 days a week, if we're doing it well, I don't think most people should be able to do so. So pulled it actually back to training 3 days a week and just went all in on lower body, which really worked out very well for us. Now, will that be the approach we take with most people? Not necessarily, but that's an example of like how we might shift things here. In this phase, training is so key. Training is the stimulus that creates muscle growth. So everything else really needs to support training and training quality. So what does training quality mean? 1, execution. We are driving the stimulus where we want to with the movement that we're doing, right? So if you're doing an RDL, like Michelle, we've worked a ton on your RDLs, right? We're still improving, but if it's, hey, this just hurts my lower back rather than I'm getting a lot of glutes out of it, or like our goal for this split squat is to build your glutes, but it's just like your quads are the limiting factor. Okay, we need to adjust our execution to actually drive the stimulus where we want it to. And this is something that both I'm looking at, like of course our training video feedback is a huge part of with clients, but also often asking questions and getting feedback from you in your weekly check-in form around your perceived stimulus, right? Are we actually feeling like we're getting a stimulus here? And then how are things progressing in your logbooks? A very important part of it. Intensity, are we actually training close enough to failure to stimulate growth? Which again, we're going to assess both via training videos and looking over your logbook. Sometimes, and again, this doesn't really come up for you. You're really good at training hard. A lot of times I'll see is like, hey, dude, we've done the first set here of your split squats, we did 50 pounds for 8. The second set, we did 50 for 10. These were supposed to both be at 1 RIR, right? If anything, like we should be a little bit more fatigued in the second set. The fact that you did 2 more reps on the second set versus the first tells me the first set was probably like 3 to 4 reps in the tank rather than 1. And the most important thing there to understand is to actually stimulate growth, we need to basically, muscle fibers we're trying to grow enough to signal to the body that, hey, this is a very stressful situation. We need to grow, adapt, get stronger and bigger so that we can better handle this next time. But if we're not training within a couple reps shy of fail, we're not going to create a stressful enough environment for that to happen typically. The intensity is huge. And then again, your progression in your logbook, specifically like key lifts. And that's like in your case, we have a couple key lifts that we're looking at for Britt, for example, it would be, okay, your RDLs, your foot elevated split squats, your leg press. Those are key lifts. We know your goal is to build your lower body, glutes specifically. Then those are key lifts we want progressing, and we're really honing in on those. We might not progress your chest press a whole lot and not as focused on that. But here, those key lifts are our main proxy for muscle growth in terms of how they're getting stronger, because we're just not going to be able to see. The thing here is, unlike fat loss, we're not going to be able to see huge visual changes. Now, when we're talking progression, I think this is also important because people can get too fixated on the logbook in this phase. Progression isn't always just, hey, you're doing more weight or more reps. Now, it can be more weight for the same reps, same weight for more reps. Those are forms of progression. But oftentimes it's also, hey, maybe we have better execution at the same weight, right? Like last week, we were a little bit sloppy. We weren't hitting our full range of motion on our leg press, or we were bouncing out of the hole. Whereas now we have better control over moving that same weight. Or maybe we even had to reduce weight, but we have better execution and better range of motion. We're doing a better job driving tension to the muscle. It's progressive stimulus. That's what we're chasing, which sometimes means, again, hey, maybe we actually need to reduce load to better execute this and drive the stimulus we want, versus just always focusing on more numbers in the logbook. But over time, the logbook should be trending up. In terms of nutrition, we need adequate fuel, but not excess. So a lot of times when we talk about a building phase, people are scared of like, but I don't want to do a bulk and have to gain like 10, 15 pounds of body fat. There's not a need to, especially at this point, and less, like I've talked about the phase that I'm in quite a lot lately, right? Where, I'm in a building phase currently. I'm very hungry. My food isn't all that high at all, but I'm growing extremely well. My nutrient partitioning is great. And like, I find this less applicable to like the female clientele I'm talking about here, more so to men. But a lot of times there's this idea of, hey, we kind of have to eat to our needs, not our appetite, where you could probably, for most guys, I find it's like, hey, we could actually eat more. For sure, there's some hunger. That might not be a bad thing, right? Where again, that's a good sign that like our insulin sensitivity is in a good place. But similarly here, like I typically find we're gonna get the best outcomes. Just maybe we're at the upper end of maintenance, so we have adequate fuel. We're not necessarily gonna get more growth out of more past that point. So the goal here is basically to stay at a similar body fat as we build tissue. So again, calories will typically be at the upper end of maintenance, probably 4 to 5 meals per day. I would say like at least 4 for most people, gonna be ideal. If we have trouble with digestion or hunger, 5 might make more sense. Really like a training day, rest day approach here as well. Now in this instance, rest days wouldn't be nearly as low as the last couple phases. We talked about like that low carb approach in like the recomp phase and the fat loss phase. Here, I would actually want a much higher carb intake. I wouldn't want like a huge drop off, because what I find is if your food is super low that previous day, carbs are super low that previous day, that will hurt our performance the next training day. Your workout fueling, so your fueling around your training is very important. So adequate hydration, a good amount of your carbs, typically between like your pre, intra, post workout, at least like 50% of our daily carbs. We talked a lot about like what peri-workout nutrition would look like in previous episodes as well, so I won't dig too deep into that here. But also this is the case where I'll probably introduce like an intra-workout drink to make sure hydration, but also even throughout the training session, like we have some carbs, we have some creatine, we have some amino acids potentially to really put us in an anabolic environment to recover. And then also the carbs will help, and creatine will help training performance. Now, again, we can't see muscle growth week to week. So when we're looking at our measures of success, we're typically looking at how is the logbook progressing on our key lifts. That's important. The execution quality in your training through our video reviews, and the intensity in our training. Those are going to be our biggest training metrics. Visually, and here we're looking at over months, not weeks. We're not going to see huge changes week to week in body composition in this phase, but over months, we should be seeing over time, if we're staying lean and we're building muscle, more definition in the areas that you're leaner. So if you have like typical female body fat storage patterns, you might have a little bit more body fat in your glutes, lower body. So we might not see like more definition, more striations there. We might see overall, yes, we're building shape here, but you're not lean enough for us to see things again like new striations. Whereas we might see, hey, you're quite lean in your upper back, your delts. Okay, we can actually see like these new striations, even like the upper chest area, your arms, you see more vascularity. All good signs we are staying lean, building muscle. Oftentimes what I find is this shows up a lot more, and I have almost everyone send me like those flex pictures alongside the relax now, which helps. But I find that this actually, I can see a lot more like, oh wow, she's looking a lot more jacked in someone's training videos, even more so than in their progress pictures. We're also looking at with like measurements, things like improved glute to waist, and visuals, things like an improved glute to waist ratio or shoulder to waist ratio. But again, basically we want body fat levels staying similar. So not a lot of blurring or loss of definition in any key areas is going to be ideal. With measurements, body measurements, waist staying the same while other measurements trend up can be a good sign. But we do need to be cautious interpreting measurements here. Again, like a lot of women will store fat preferentially on the lower body. So what we might see is, oh, my glutes went up, but my waist stayed the same. So I'm building glutes, right? We could just be storing more body fat there as well. So again, this is kind of combined with what we're seeing visually and in the logbook. Now, I'm not too concerned with seeing a certain number on the scale, but remember that the goal here is not to get leaner, the goal is to build muscle. So we don't want you losing weight via body fat. If we're gaining muscle, we should be over time gaining weight on our frame via muscle mass. So the scale should be slowly trending up over time. It is very hard to put a number on this because it varies so much. I've seen some instances that don't make sense to me where it's like, I don't know how we only gained 2 pounds here, but it looks like you have like 15 pounds more muscle. I can think of a couple. I think my client Kim from Australia is somebody who really comes to mind here, where it's like, our weight isn't hardly changing, but your body composition looks so much different in this building phase. It's cool to see. Again, I've talked with several mentors about this. Like, for some reason, women seem to be so much more capable of body recomposition. But basically, I'm not too concerned with the number on the scale, but expect it to probably slowly trend up. Now, from there, then we are getting into our final fat loss phase, right? So we've gone through a long, productive building phase. This final fat loss push should only take about 8 to 12 weeks. And if we do this correctly, for many clients, this is when they kind of reach their initial goal physique. Now, of course, this depends on how advanced your goal physique was. Let me back this up though and kind of talk through the basics of it first. So again, probably going to be about 8 to 12 weeks. By this point, we should have built a solid amount of muscle over the last 6 months. You've maintained your body fat quite well while building, so we don't have a whole lot more body fat. Maybe there were a few weeks where we got a little bit looser with things. We have slightly more, but not a whole lot. You've been eating higher calories for a long time. So again, this sets us up very well for a very productive fat loss phase. Should be relatively easy because we spent so long at higher calories, so we have plenty to pull from. Probably also not doing a lot of cardio, so we can leverage both more cardio and lower calories. And your body should be in a very healthy, responsive place by this point. So here we can typically see quick fat loss in the first few weeks. And this is probably the coolest phase yet because we're uncovering the shape that we've been building over the last few phases, over the last like year now. I said this is a year of transformation, but if you like put together the timelines I put together, it's longer than a year, but I'm sorry. I want to be realistic again on timelines.
Sorry, not sorry.
But really, for most people, I would say like a lot of times people underestimate what they're actually capable of here, unless your initial goal physique is one where it's like, damn, this is a lot more muscle. Typically, this is when most people reach their goal physique, is at the end of this fat loss phase where, okay, we got leaner, we set up the foundation, we built the muscle we needed. Now we had to lose a bit more body fat to get to that goal physique, which is such a cool place to be. And now, okay, let's reassess. What do we accomplish next and lay out like what does our next year's timeline look like? Now, again, understand that the more muscle the goal physique requires, especially, the longer this will take. For some people, this is working through multiple cycles. But for again, like someone like the most common client avatar we discussed here, I think this is a pretty feasible timeline. So to kind of recap what this looked like one more time, weeks 1 through 6, we had that primer phase where we were really building the foundation. Weeks 7 through 18, we had the body recomposition phase. We're focusing on that move more, eat more approach, losing fat, building muscle at the same time. Weeks 19 through 30, roughly, were that fat loss phase where we're getting a lot leaner quickly. 31 through 56, roughly, were the lean building phase, building a new shape. And then the last 57 to 68-ish, week 57 to week 69, were revealing all the shape we built so far and probably getting to the initial goal physique. Biggest takeaways here. Phases potentiate each other, right? If we would have skipped the primer phase, realistically, this person would probably just be spinning their wheels a year from now, wouldn't have been able to do like the next couple phases well, or wouldn't have been as responsive as we wanted. So that is important. I find that for this individual, move more, eat more works so much better than that, like just try to eat less at all costs. Just constant eat less, move more. You have to build muscle to have the shape you want. You can't just diet your way there. Training quality is such an important part of this. Training as a whole is such an important part of this. And for most people, this will be longer than a year project, and we need to embrace that. Any questions, final thoughts from you, Michelle, before we wrap it up?
I think we covered everything really well.
Perfect. All right, y'all. Well, hopefully this was helpful. Hopefully this helps you set your year up for success. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot me a DM on Instagram. If you would like to apply to work with our team, you can hit the link in the show notes to apply for coaching, and we will catch you guys next time.